This is the most realistic wilderness survival show I've seen. 10 contestants are dropped into the Arctic wilderness. The last one standing wins $500,000. There are no scripts or cameramen, just 10 tools provided by the show's crew. Contestants must endure loneliness and extreme weather, always on guard against attacks from grizzly bears, wolves, and moose. Contestant Nathan, a landowner without a farm, started gaining wilderness survival experience at 19. Now a skilled carpenter, designer, and biologist, his goal is to win the prize money to build a farm. When Nathan was dropped off, he immediately spotted a squirrel on a spruce tree and shot an arrow at it. Unfortunately, he missed, and the arrow got stuck in a branch. However, he quickly chopped down the tree with an axe and attempted to start a fire using a bow drill, a technique he preferred over using a flint, which takes up one of the tool slots. Despite his expertise, he couldn't get a fire started after the wind blew away his tinder. After struggling for another half hour, he gave up and focused on building a shelter using a tripod of small trees, a horizontal beam, and a waterproof tarp, crucial for defense against wild animals, especially during the moose mating season. That night, the stunning northern lights filled the sky. Nathan was awoken by nearby footsteps, and to his surprise, a moose actually approached him. However, he turned off the camera to sleep, inadvertently letting the $500,000 slip away. The next morning, Nathan continued with the bow drill using 2 new types of wood he found nearby. Hours of friction later, the fire still wouldn't start. Just then, the video cut out. When it resumed, the fire was burning, but unfortunately, the recording didn't capture the process due to the memory card filling up. The next contestant, Nikki, a survival guide and fisherwoman with 20 years of primitive living experience, once lived on an island with a friend for a year and a half, learning the essence of survival. Nikki, who has hunted 2 bears and a cougar, joined the show to prove her skills and hopefully win the $500,000. After being dropped off, she carried 60 pounds of filming equipment to find a suitable campsite. She quickly scouted the area, which would soon be covered by heavy snow. Lucky for her, she found some porcini mushrooms, but they were spoiled by rats, evidenced by the bite marks and droppings. Nikki carefully removed the contaminated parts, knowing that food is a fundamental part of wilderness survival. While gathering mushrooms, she heard a low growl and discovered a lynx staring at her. The lynx, perhaps deeming her a difficult target, turned and left. Nikki expressed regret that lynxes are protected. Otherwise, it would have made a fine meal. Knowing that lynxes and snow hares share a diet, she tried to follow the lynx but lost track of it soon after. Contestant Tim is a professional hunter. At 55, he believes his years of experience make him more likely to win this challenge. He prepared by gaining weight to store fat and immediately started hunting large animals on the second day. He understood the key points to winning and found footprints and animal trails indicating the presence of moose and black bears nearby. Tim decided to build a wall to block them, giving him time to attack. Just as he finished the wall, he heard a noise.
I just spooked the heck out of that. I was getting ready to throw this camera so I could draw my bow.
Contestant Barry, a self-defense coach from a hunting family, learned his ancestors' skills from childhood. He believes his ingrained survival skills are superior to those who trained specifically for the competition. Right after being dropped off and making a few remarks, he heard a helicopter. It turned out his hat was left on the plane, and the crew returned to deliver it.
I forgot something! A hat!
Showing great care. Near his camp, Barry found a squirrel. He set up a snare trap, commonly used for small animals. As he prepared a second trap, he found a squirrel right in front of him, enjoying breakfast in the sunlight. It appeared to have been killed by a headshot, giving Barry a sniper-like feeling. On day 4 of the survival challenge, Nathan checked the fishing nets he had set up in the lake the previous day. Seeing him pick up a stick, it was clear he had caught a fish.
That's food for a week! Easily, look how monstrous it is.
Unexpectedly large. Nathan dissected it on the spot, securing food for a week, giving him a great start. Tim, on the other hand, had not eaten in 4 days. He was tirelessly hunting large animals. Today, near his camp, he found a swampy area with many animal tracks, an ideal hunting spot. He decided to rest overnight and hunt in the morning. On his way back, Tim found a wild shovel, which contestants are allowed to use.
Chomp it down, that's what I do. Oh, you never know. Oh,
He was thrilled, but slipped and injured himself, leading to his withdrawal from the competition after a medical check confirmed a fracture. Tim was the first contestant eliminated this season, unable to use his strategy or fat reserves. By day 5, snow began falling, quickly covering the ground. Nathan had to brave the snowstorm to improve his shelter. Barry tried to go out, but nearly froze his hands after 15 minutes.
Come on, fish. Come on, fish. Oh, it's blowing it already.
Nikki had similar experiences, retreating from fishing due to the snow. Contestant Ray is a search and rescue dog trainer. He started hunting with a bow and arrow at 14 and knows animal habits well. He is skilled at making various types of traps. Ray believes his skills will help him survive longer in the challenge. Winning the $500,000 prize would allow him to move his family away from the city for a better life. Today, on his 6th day in the competition, Ray, who hasn't eaten, desperately needs a fish to satisfy his hunger. He believed he would find a fish so desperate to eat that it wouldn't miss any bait. Surprisingly, he was right.
Oh, I got a fish. Get it up. Ah.
Ray couldn't wait to eat it, but when he cut the fish open with his knife, he found it filled with parasites. He had to cook it thoroughly to avoid infection. The meat attracted a crow, so Ray gave it the fish's gills as a form of protection payment. The next contestant, Jordan, is often called the Chinese son-in-law. He lived with reindeer herders in Siberia for 5 years, learning many survival skills like fishing, hunting, and trap setting. Growing up on a farm, he's used to living alone and thinks leaving his family for a few months to win a large cash prize is worth it. It means more time with family later. On day 6, Jordan's shelter is shaping up. He even made a moose call during his free time. Today, he planned to check his traps, but found nothing. Knowing he's leaner than contestants with more body fat, Jordan realized he needs to store enough food before winter to survive. He intended to scout hunting spots, but found the area burnt by a wildfire, leaving only his campsite green. This challenging start was tough. Donnie should be familiar from a previous wilderness survival show. He's served in the military and survived around the world, now running a wilderness survival school. Despite his heart condition, which he calls the Widowmaker, he prefers to fight for his faith rather than wait passively at home. On day 6, Donnie's shelter, which offers excellent insulation, was nearly complete. He planned to add moss for extra warmth to withstand Arctic conditions. Once his shelter was set, Donnie needed to address food. He prepared to make a throwing stick, reportedly powerful enough to break a deer's leg.
That's a throw.
After careful crafting, it seemed well made, but its effectiveness was yet to be tested. The season's second female contestant, Michelle, grew up in a remote mountain village where hunting, fishing, and trapping were daily activities. She stated she wouldn't quit the challenge unless severely injured, as the $500,000 prize could significantly improve her family's life. Unfortunately, by day 7, Michelle hadn't had a decent meal. Despite her fishing skills, she hadn't even seen a fish scale after several days. Her only find was a broken oil drum, a prime wilderness survival item that could be turned into many useful tools. Michelle's idea was to turn it into a bobber for fishing. She first cut some branches to make a frame for the oil drum, which would prevent it from rolling in the water. Then she crafted the fishing hooks into lifelike bait, and finally tied them around the drum to launch it into the water. The scene shifts to Nikki. It's already noon, and she hasn't gotten up yet. Perhaps this conserves energy, especially since she's eaten nothing but mushrooms these past few days. After getting up, she gathered some branches to make a mouse trap, placing it where she previously picked mushrooms. Seeing how she handled the knife, something seemed off. Before anyone could speak, she accidentally cut her hand. Thankfully, the crew had an emergency medical kit, and Nikki quickly used gauze to stop the bleeding. The wound was quite deep. In the cold wilderness, not only are wounds slow to heal, but they are also prone to infection. Improper care could lead to sepsis. The camera then turns to Donnie. To prepare for the Arctic winter, he was gathering dry wood daily. Having had no luck fishing recently, he decided to go hunting with his bow and arrows. He didn't get far before sitting down, adopting a wait-and-see approach. After an unknown wait, He heard a noise nearby, grabbed his bow and arrows, and rushed towards it. Donnie fired into the bushes, and by his expression, he seemed to have hit his target. After starving for 7 days, Donnie finally caught some food. Simple preparations later, the muskrat was turned into a barbecue. There was no cumin or spice mix, since hunger is the best seasoning. Though the meat was only enough to fill the gaps between his teeth, it gave Donnie hope of winning. Feeling energized after eating, he encountered problems 2 hours later. His stomach began to hurt. Donnie turned off the camera to address the issue, realizing it was serious. The meat likely contained parasites, causing dysentery and intestinal cramps. It was going to be a tough night. Back to Nikki, her hand was beginning to heal. With a new bandage, she continued to work. Chopping trees with one hand wasn't easy, but for survival, she couldn't stop. On the 8th day, just before dawn, the QE inside Donnie became overwhelming, leading to delirium. Not only was his stomach empty, but his body fluids were also depleted. Barely making it to the next morning, his condition worsened, causing chest pain after dry heaving, likely from dehydration thickening his blood, triggering his heart condition. After a fierce internal struggle, Donnie finally collapsed and couldn't continue. After making the call to quit, although he didn't last until the end, he had given it his all, and in his child's eyes, he was the best. The challenge had only reached day 8, and out of 10 contestants, only 8 remained. To win $500,000, Wanya licked a large tree because birch sap contains various nutrients and could relieve her extreme hunger and thirst. Today was her 9th day in the wilderness, and her shelter still needed to be reinforced and upgraded before the Arctic winter set in. As the 3rd female contestant this season, her wilderness survival skills were extensive. Not only familiar with various edible wild plants, but fishing, hunting, and setting traps were also within her capabilities. The game in her hands was both food and clothing. Joining the Wilderness Survival Challenge was to prove that even a small woman can be fierce and formidable. Currently, there are only a few hours of daylight in the Arctic. Most of the time is spent inside shelters. Therefore, she pays extra attention to safety and warmth. She not only debarked the tree trunks to prevent fires, but also laid a layer of pine branches on the outside to insulate against rain and snow. Finally, she customized a small door for the shelter. With that, the quaint cabin was completed. Now, she can focus on gathering and hunting. Contestant Jordan is quite astonishing. He is probably the wealthiest contestant right now. He complained about the scarcity of resources at his camp. Yet just 2 days after setting traps, he enjoyed a great harvest, catching 4 plump rabbits. There was also an unexpected gain while processing the food, which felt rather cruel. He not only took the baby rabbits' food but also turned them into delicious rabbit heads. Life is quite comfortable for him that he even thought about bringing his family to live there. On the 10th day of the challenge, Nathan said he had a wonderful dream overnight. He dreamed of pulling a huge black bull out of his fishing net. He took it as a sign that today's catch would be good. He hurried to the lakeside and, to his surprise, caught a large fatty fish, about the same size as the last one. Nathan quickly pulled it out and noticed the female fish had a large belly, likely full of roe. Using his years of fishing experience and skilled technique, he extracted all the roe in no time. This is a luxury ingredient in wilderness survival, and he ate the raw roe on the spot. The bravery of this season's contestants is notable as they all go all out to win the $500,000 prize. The large roe can be used as bait, and the rest taken back to camp for stewing and grilling, truly making the most of what they have. However, the risks of eating raw roe soon became apparent. Nathan returned to the shelter feeling dizzy and weak. Instead of feasting on meat and soup, he now just wanted to lie down and sleep. A few hours later, he felt turmoil inside and couldn't help but rush outside to vomit violently. After a thorough purge, he felt completely drained, even vomiting blood. He realized the roe might not have been fresh. With some strength left, he hurried back to lie down in the shelter. The last person infected by parasites had already been carried away. Could Nathan be following in his footsteps? The camera then moves to Ray, who, after failing to catch fish, had to rely on berries to stave off hunger. However, this meager food was not enough to sustain him. So, he set his sights on a neighboring squirrel. Considering the squirrel's agile movements, Ray prepared to make a scissor-type trap. Although he had come to see the squirrel as a companion over the days, for the sake of filling his stomach and winning the $500,000 prize, Ray thought it was not too much to eat it in an emergency. Once the preparation was ready, Ray set the trap and waited for the squirrel to spring it. As soon as the squirrel stepped on the mechanism, the scissors would tightly clamp around it. On the 11th day of the challenge, Barry, who had previously killed a squirrel with a single arrow, did not focus on upgrading and reinforcing his shelter. Instead, he was earnestly teaching a girl fighting skills. Today, he prepared to explore a new area in search of game. He had just left the camp when he made a new discovery. From his expression, I thought he had found a moose, but it turned out to be several broken pots. Barry, treating them like treasures, picked them all up. He planned to turn these pots into fish-shaped lures. After some hammering, the lures were made and looked quite convincing. Barry immediately went to the lakeside to check his results, hopeful after 9 days without animal protein. Surprisingly, his luck was excellent, and he quickly caught a fish. Just as days' worth of food was within reach, he didn't expect the leader line to be cut and to lose the fish hook. Barry's mood instantly exploded like popcorn. Next up is the season's last contestant, Brady, a former instructor at the American Special Training Academy, skilled in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, and responsible for training new recruits. A true professional, he entered the competition simply to win the prize money and improve his life. His shelter was already built, and he was focusing on gathering food. After collecting berries, he went into the jungle to hunt and unexpectedly found a musk deer skeleton. Although the meat was eaten by wolves, the bones were still valuable, especially the skull, which he hung as a totem at his shelter, exuding absolute dominance. He made tools from the remaining bones. Brady cut a piece of cloth, found a musk deer bone, and started working with a roll of wire. Without a bow and arrow, he struggled to hunt large animals, relying on fishing and traps for food. After a busy period, he created various biomimetic baits and hurried to the lakeside to test his results. Surprisingly, he caught a fish quickly, enough to feed him for several days. The resources here were truly excellent.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Dinner, maybe some breakfast.
On day 13 of the survival challenge, Ray, unable to catch fish, was determined to eat the neighboring squirrel. Today, he checked his traps with a bow and arrow, found the mechanism stuck, but unexpectedly, the squirrel appeared. Ray mercilessly shot it.
And I put him out of his misery. It's what's for dinner.
And soon the squirrel was stewed. At that moment, Ray felt great. Not long after eating the squirrel, he felt deeply guilty and remorseful, crying in front of the camera, perhaps shedding crocodile tears. Nathan, having eaten raw fish roe, hadn't left his shelter due to vomiting, and it seemed he might be the next to quit. However, he managed to persist. The camera then moved to Michelle, who had been float fishing. Sadly, she had no catch yet, frustrating her after 12 days on a vegetarian diet. She caught a partridge by trap, a sudden delight that excited her, and she dove into immersive wilderness survival, returning to her shelter to eat. After eating, she lamented her misfortune when her shelter caught fire. Other contestants survived on wild vegetables and berries, but Jordan, finding rabbit meat too lean and unpalatable, had a different idea when a moose visited his camp last night. He took his bow and arrows and patrolled near the camp, finding moose tracks in a mud pit close to his shelter. Thinking of the $500,000 prize so close, Jordan smiled smugly, prepared to set up an alarm system nearby for the next encounter. The survival challenge has reached day 14, with 8 contestants remaining. Last night, Michelle got overly excited while eating chicken, causing the moss on the fireplace to catch fire. Luckily, it was still early in the challenge, and the fire was quickly controlled. Learning from this, she chopped new logs to rebuild and sealed the gaps with clay for both warmth and safety. Unfortunately, she overlooked the oil drum she found. If transformed into a fireplace, it could have been a safe and functional stove. The camera then moved to Nikki, who had previously set several mouse traps. Early this morning, she came to check on her catch. The first trap was not triggered, but the second one seemed successful. With high hopes, Nikki lifted the stone cover to find a mouse squashed flat. Yet she was still overjoyed and grateful, as this was her first meat meal in half a month. She quickly made it into a skewer, pairing it with blueberries for a side. The small meal was tasty, but not enough to satisfy her hunger. Nikki aimed to catch a larger animal, so she went hunting with her bow and arrows. Her luck was good today, spotting a large squirrel and shooting it down. Although the contestants are skilled archers, Nikki accidentally injured herself with her own arrow while returning to camp, a mishap following a recent cut. Despite the deep wound, she swiftly bandaged it and continued, proving to be this season's most entertaining contestant. Meanwhile, Jordan was mimicking the mating call of a female deer to attract a moose, hoping to win the $500,000 prize. Shortly after he started, an alarm near the camp went off. He rushed out barefoot and pantsless, carefully scouting the area. He found a moose by a pond and shot at it with his bow, but missed. With only one arrow brought in haste, he could only watch as the moose walked away. He believed he could still lure it back. On day 16, Ray was once again after a squirrel, which narrowly escaped. Reflecting on having eaten only a fish and a squirrel in half a month, Ray felt dejected. To distract himself, he began to upgrade and fortify his shelter with pine branches inside and moss outside, constructing a warm air raid shelter that could withstand the Arctic cold, but could potentially collapse under heavy snow. After completing his shelter, Ray decided to go fishing. As food was his most pressing need. Despite his efforts, his luck was poor today with no catch, which he attributed to the spawning season as the fish were protecting their eggs. Ultimately, he resorted to picking berries to stave off hunger. This setback nearly broke him, but the thought of a regular 9-to-5 job and the freedom the prize money could bring kept him going. The camera shifts to Wanya. Her situation is not much better. Halfway through the competition, she has yet to eat meat. Most of her screen time shows her roasting socks, which might be her way of satisfying hunger through smell. After roasting, she lies down to pick and eat berries. Her vegetarian diet has left her craving meat, so she takes her bow and arrows in search of game. Surprisingly, she finds something valuable, a moose antler recently shed, alongside chewed branches, a sure sign of a nearby moose. If she could hunt it down, the $500,000 prize would be hers. Wania starts a thorough search, but instead finds a grouse. Without hesitation, she shoots it. It seemed to have flown away, but feathers and blood on the arrow suggest it didn't go far. After searching, Wania finds it, holds it in her arms, and can't help but drool with emotion. After days of wild vegetables and berries, she finally gets to eat meat. Laughing with relief, she quickly plucks and cooks the grouse into a hearty soup, feeling immensely satisfied, as if reaching a life's peak. It's day 19, and Ray is still surviving on berries, visibly thinner. Today, he gears up for hunting again, but soon starts pondering life. Before the competition, he thought he could survive well on his skills, but now sees no hope. After much hesitation, Ray calls on a satellite phone. His parting words are simple. He's quitting because he can't find enough to eat. Surviving 19 days on just one fish and a squirrel is already impressive. The camera then turns to Jordan, who tries fishing by the lake but catches nothing, feeling foolish just standing there. He decides to focus on traps and hunting instead. Still fixated on a missed moose opportunity, he devises a new strategy involving fences to corral and direct moose to a certain area, making them easier to handle. After explaining, Jordan grabs an axe and starts building, sharing tree-cutting tips along the way. After some hard work, he quickly encloses an area. By nightfall, everything is set. The next morning, as Jordan is about to move his traps, he is shocked to see a moose. Jordan shoots at a moose. Following the blood trail, he soon finds frothy blood, indicating a lung shot. He just needs to wait it out. After much effort, he finds the moose. Cautiously, he approaches. The injured moose is highly aggressive, and approaching rashly could provoke a counterattack. A lung-shot moose will die within 6 hours. The safest method is to wait patiently and keep chanting spells silently. 3 hours later, the moose succumbs after several desperate struggles. Jordan carefully checks the situation.
Yeah!
With continued caution and food protection, the $500,000 prize seems assured. Jordan was busy until after 10 p.m., transporting meat back to camp on the 20th day of the survival challenge. Brady, imagining the taste of elk, became unbearably hungry and went out to forage. He found no food, only elk droppings, which were a good sign for others, but useless to him, as he was the only one without a bow and arrow. Brady believed the contest was about enduring hunger since catching big game was as likely as winning the lottery. Thus he focused on trapping and fishing, excelling at the latter and soon catching a large fish, which he loudly celebrated. Although the fish paled in comparison to Jordan's elk, it was enough to keep him competitive. Back at camp, Brady boasted about his catch, while Jordan, the wealthiest contestant, worried about storing his deer meat. The trees near his camp were covered with meat, and he had built a storage rack, but there was still no room for 800 pounds of meat. The local temperature was inadequate for refrigeration, so the best preservation method was smoking the meat. However, sleeping in such a shelter attracted other predators. Concerned, Jordan covered the meat with pine branches at around 10 p.m., knowing bears could smell meat from 30 kilometers away, forcing him to sleep with one eye open. Meanwhile, Barry, driven mad by hunger after eating only blueberries, screamed in agony at midnight due to a leg cramp caused by malnutrition. He endured until morning, then boiled water to regain strength, realizing his body was warning him. He planned to use a stick to gather food after playing a song to boost his morale. On the 22nd day, Nathan's camp was covered in snow, and he planned to repair his shelter, but changed his plans after finding wolverine tracks in the snow. Following the tracks for about 8 kilometers, he lost them to snowfall and realized he needed to return to camp quickly to avoid getting lost. Exhausted and having wasted energy, Nathan faced a worsening survival environment. Jordan enjoyed char-grilled elk meat, turning the challenge into a vacation. As long as the meat stayed fresh and bears stayed away, winning seemed likely. Wonia, having eaten grass for over 20 days, was thrilled when a rabbit fell into her trap.
Oh my God, I got a rabbit.
After thanking the heavens, she prepared the rabbit and even showcased her craft skills by cutting the fur into strips, tying them to a tree, and twisting them into a plush rope. The camera shifts to Nikki. Today is her 45th birthday, unexpectedly celebrated in the Arctic wilderness. She lights some club moss, makes a wish, and then exits her shelter to check the traps. After more than 20 days in the competition, apart from catching a rat, she hasn't had a decent meal. She is hopeful for today's traps, but after checking several, she finds nothing. Just when she loses hope, the last trap surprises her with a live rabbit. Nikki joyously embraces it, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Nikki then enjoys a feast, starting with blueberry and rabbit heart stew as an appetizer, a delicious mix of flavors. She licks the pot clean, thoroughly satisfied. The main course is roasted rabbit legs, making her 45th birthday celebration a complete success. After the meal, Nikki plans to sleep well, but is awakened at midnight by roaring outside. Possibly attracted by the rabbit's scent, an unwelcome visitor lurks. Nikki cautiously looks outside but sees nothing. She endures the long night and finds footprints in the snow the next morning, likely from a wolf or a bobcat. On Barry's 28th day alone in the wilderness, he checks nearby traps and finds a rabbit that had been caught for a while. Starving, he quickly skins it and prepares a meat stew in his ground pot. After a long and anxious wait, he devours the rabbit kidneys, feeling incredibly satisfied. This rabbit feast fills him with strength, and he no longer worries about nighttime leg cramps. As he shares his plans, the scene suddenly freezes. He hears noises outside, sounding like a black bear searching for food. Barry quickly fires a bear banger into the sky, successfully scaring the bear away. Relieved, he remarks that he would have shot it with an arrow if it had come closer. After surviving the long night, Barry is not intimidated by the bear and contemplates hunting one. He plans to bury the skin under a rock with a can of stones on top, which would alert him via a trigger mechanism to attack the digging bear. The scene shifts to Brady, who has been living comfortably. In addition to the big fish he caught days ago, he finds a skillet and a solid wood chair, making his fish fry incredibly enjoyable. The taste reminds him of his wife, stirring a sudden longing for his family. Wania's situation is different. Although she hasn't eaten much these days, she has been tirelessly working to survive longer. especially with the harsh Arctic winter approaching. She plans to enhance her wooden walls into a double-structured shelter, filling the cavity with moss and spruce branches for insulation. Junia works until midnight to finish the shelter, which she proudly shows off at dawn. Her creation is not only aesthetically pleasing, but also warm, likely the strongest luxury home this season, as long as it doesn't catch fire during the winter. Day 29 of the challenge. Contestant Nathan also got too cold, so he bought a solid wood bed. After setting it up, he went to the lake to check his fishing nets. Unexpectedly, he caught a big fat fish today. Nathan was so excited he got goosebumps. Every time he checks the nets, he catches a big fish. If Jordan hasn't hunted a moose, he would be the richest contestant right now. The fish caught today weighs at least 3 kilos. With the smoked fish stored in the shelter, he won't go hungry this week. If things keep going like this, he still has a chance to win the $500,000. Nathan has already planned how to spend the money. He dreams of eating roasted fish. Life would be very comfortable. Michelle would definitely be devastated to know, because she hasn't had protein in 7 days. Early in the morning, she came to the lake to check the fishing floats, but the much-anticipated device not only failed to catch anything, it also broke down completely. This was a blow for Michelle, who claims to be a fishing master. Actually, the resources here are not bad. It's just that Michelle hasn't utilized them well. Especially the oil drum, which is so versatile. She made the least useful thing with it. Now she can only hope for the traps. But after checking, there was still no catch. Anxious and malnourished, Michelle felt dizzy and just sat down on the ground. She started crying out of frustration. The camera then moved to Nikki. Recently, she hasn't been very active. Just her hands cracking from the cold. She made a pot of pine needle tea to soak her fingers. It contains antiseptic and antibacterial agents, helping her fingers recover quickly. After washing her hands, she added a squirrel. She made a nutritious dinner. Now, Nikki not only has meat, but also stores vegetables like mushrooms and berries. Her life is getting better and better. Although she was covered in cuts a few days ago, her wounds have almost healed, just as Nikki felt relieved. Unexpectedly, a new accident occurred. A fire started. It quickly spread to the roof. Nikki bravely ran outside to save what she could, but was driven back by the flames while trying to remove burning logs by hand. Nikki truly adds drama to the show. What is supposed to be a harsh survival show turned out to have comedic moments. First, she cut her hand. Then she stabbed her leg. And now she nearly turned herself into barbecue. With Nikki's half-cooked hands, the show's crew cannot let her suffer. Although Nikki's house was burned, her spirit remains optimistic. After all, this survival challenge is worth $1 million. The house can be repaired, and the challenge continued. Other contestants try to avoid mistakes, but Nikki hasn't made any specific improvements. She just replaced the charred logs. Can this really prevent another fire? The camera then moved to Michelle. Thought she would try ice fishing, but she started with a baffling approach. Probably because she was really hungry, Michelle dared to drink cold water. After 30 days, she lost 20 kilograms. If she doesn't find food today, she really has to go home. Luckily, fate had other plans. When checking the traps, she caught a rabbit. She was so excited she could hardly speak coherently. Catching a rabbit in 30 days is truly not easy. As usual, she had to cry first. Haven't seen Barry for a long time. His bear trap was triggered last night. Barry said he slept too soundly to hear it. The area around the trap was full of fox prints. The bear hunt plan was thus ruined. Barry was very angry. Day 31 of the challenge. Since Brady had a fried fish feast, he has been missing his family uncontrollably. His food storage is sufficient to solve his food and clothing needs, and he believes he can get even more food. But loneliness and emptiness are hard for him to bear. He tried fishing to pass the boring time, but it made him reject this lifestyle even more. He even thought about quitting the competition. Back at the shelter, Brady was restless, tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep. The next day, he woke up and didn't even want to film. Now, he just wants to go home to see his children. Eventually, he made the call to quit the competition. The reason is simple. He misses his family too much. He believes family is more important than money. On day 36 of the survival challenge, Jordan complains about his roast being too tough to chew. So, he invents a natural wooden chew stick, which is highly insulting, but not very threatening to the others. He wonders if he'll get beaten up after the contest ends. After boasting, Jordan checks his food storage. The venison is crucial to his $500,000 prize. Near the camp, he finds many animal tracks and deduces they're from wolves. Known as notorious camp killers, he must figure out how to deal with them. Late at night, despite being very tired, Jordan refuses to sleep and decides to lie in wait. As expected, the badger arrives. After observing carefully, he approaches the badger unarmed. Following a burst of rapid footsteps, Jordan returns to the shelter safely after a tense encounter where both chose to flee. The next morning, he finds several pounds of fat stolen, a vital loss. Eating more meat hardly helps against the severe cold. Furious, even though it has sharp claws and stronger bite force than wolves, the badger faced severe consequences after provoking the wrong person. Jordan sets up an alarm system at the camp, preparing for its death when it returns. Barry seems to have good luck. Disturbed by a group of foxes at midnight, he shivers in his sleeping bag, powerless against them. The next morning, he drinks cold water to calm himself. As his traps are always robbed by foxes, he goes fishing by the lake out of sheer hunger. Recently, he made a shiny lure and decides to test it. Surprisingly, he catches a fish quickly, the biggest he has ever caught. Trying to pull it directly proved difficult, so he decides to scoop it with a branch instead.
No. Damn!
The fish escapes, causing Barry to explode mentally. Back at camp, he quickly makes a sophisticated-looking net to check its effectiveness. Barry's fishing spot is indeed excellent. Despite the risks, it is rich in resources. No sooner had he spoken than he caught a big fish, managed it with one hand while scooping it up with the net in the other.
My scoop net worked! Yeah!
Securing a week's food. It seems the fish king of the season is settled. Back to Jordan. To get rid of the badger stealing his venison, he waits until late at night. As he almost falls asleep, a sudden clatter of cans wakes him. Armed with a bow and arrow, he steps out to check and spots the badger not far away. Without a word, he shoots an arrow, pinning it to the ground. He quickly grabs an axe to finish it off. The poor creature is already dead. Although it doesn't make up for the stolen fat, Jordan has to settle for that. The next morning, Jordan began dealing with the wolverine. The scene was truly horrifying. To prevent other animals from stealing food, Jordan decided to build a food storage rack high up. He used several large trees as natural supports, cutting them at the right height. To stop other animals from climbing up, Jordan deliberately stripped the bark clean and finally built a platform on top. The rack was thus made. After that, Jordan built a ladder and placed both wolverine and deer meat on it. This way, the wolverine no longer had to risk stealing. The camera then shifted to Nikki. A few days ago, her shelter had burned down. Repairing the house had consumed a lot of energy, so she stewed a pot of rabbit meat to treat herself. Nikki found it delicious, even eating the marrow as if it were spaghetti. After breakfast, she took her bow and arrow and went hunting. Along the way, she found many squirrel tracks in the snow and quickly located one. Without saying much, she shot it with an arrow and caught it. Just days after her shelter burned down, today she got bitten by a squirrel. To prevent infection, Nikki hurried back to the shelter to treat the wound. Despite being the source of all the humor in the show, there was a slight concern for her, as even Band-Aids can run out. The camera moved to Michelle. She was brushing her teeth with charcoal and a toothbrush. After finishing, Michelle got up to check her traps, eager to catch a rabbit as she hadn't had protein in a long time. When she checked the traps, she found rabbit tracks everywhere, but the trap was empty. Noticing nearby fox tracks, she suspected a rabbit might have been intercepted by it. This guess was quickly confirmed as she witnessed a fox eating a rabbit cleanly, leaving only a tuft of fur for Michelle, who was almost furious. The next day, checking the traps again, she found not only had the fox stolen the rabbit, and also took the trap away with them. Her boastful claims from the previous day were instantly refuted. Junia was also affected. Like Michelle, she had not had protein for a long time and was hopeful about the traps. When she checked, she found the rope had been bitten through by a fox and the rabbit likely intercepted. Unwilling to sit idly by, Junia returned to the shelter to smoke her hair while thinking about how to deal with the foxes. She also thought of common traps easily robbed by foxes, so she decided to make some spring traps. a structure with thousands of years of history. After determining the height, Wanya began setting up ground devices. The process was time-consuming, but should be effective, at least better than the helpless Michelle. Surprisingly, even Jordan, the expert, had a setback. He caught an 800-pound elk, but every 100 grams of elk meat contained less than 1 gram of fat. After eating it for a month, he actually lost over 20 pounds. In this way, winning the $500,000 prize seemed unlikely, let alone surviving until the end, since the team conducts regular health checks on contestants, and those not meeting health standards are advised to leave. Therefore, he decided to target fatty lake trout. The fat in the fish could effectively maintain his weight. Jordan went to the lake to start lure fishing, using spinning lures with a professional rod and standard casting posture. As expected, it was not long before he caught a big fish and immediately switched to fish walking mode after discarding the rod. The big shot finally messed up, not only losing a big fish but also his carefully made bait. The show instantly became more interesting. With no other choice, he had to go back and eat several kilograms of venison to vent his frustration. Late at night, Jordan was still annoyed by his struggle to obtain fat, even though he had caught a deer but was nearly starving. Hopefully he won't drop out because of this. That would be really disappointing. The camera then turned to Nathan, who turned into Tony the hairdresser and cut his own hair. With his skills, he could easily have a side job back home. After fixing his hair, Nathan planned to check the fishing net, having not caught any fish for a week. Without food, he might not last much longer. When he got to the lake to check the net, he was confused to find it empty, though the lake's center had plenty of big fish, unfortunately out of his reach. Frustrated and starving, Nathan knelt down in despair. Luckily, he stepped back. Otherwise, he would have fallen into the lake. He quickly got up and staggered back to camp to cook the last of his food into a soup for strength. After this meal, he would be hungry tomorrow, making today's fishing net check crucial. After lunch, Nathan, full of hope, went to check the net again. Given his condition, walking on the lake's icy surface each time he set or pulled the net was a huge risk. Fortunately, this time he finally caught something. After finding a safe spot, he carefully pulled out the net. Though he was extremely weak from hunger, to his surprise, the net had caught a big fish. Tears of joy nearly spilled from Nathan's mouth. Back at the shelter, he immediately started processing the fish, a fierce barracuda known to some as the Z-wolf, which bit Nathan just before dying, a bit too much. Nathan instantly killed it and found another small fish inside, making it a surprising bonus. He just threw the small fish into the pot to stew. To understand how cold it was, just look at Nikki. She was sharpening her utensils when her spit instantly turned into frozen yogurt. Fortunately, she got up to check her traps, which, as the show's highlight, captured a rabbit today. Nikki couldn't help but cry and kept thanking the rabbit before taking it home to process. After over 40 days in the competition, Nikki had lost a lot of weight. She thought relying solely on meat was nutritionally inadequate, so she decided to eat the contents of the rabbit's stomach as well, to add some fiber and minerals to her diet. Everyone has seen beef or lamb soup, but rabbit soup, surprisingly fragrant like a floral and woody scent, was new and appealing. Meanwhile, Barry thought he had already won and expected his wife to pick him up during the routine check the next day. Still, he had to check his traps before going home to ensure he had enough to eat. Along the way, he spotted a squirrel and shot an arrow at it, but missed, as the squirrel was too quick. Despite a second attempt, he missed again. Barry figured he was the champion already and could do without the extra food. During the medical check the next day, he was confused to find there was no victory, no wife, just a checkup. His morale completely broken, Barry couldn't help but cry, missing his beautiful wife back home and unsure if he could keep going, as loneliness was their greatest enemy. Michelle had been holding out in the Arctic for over 40 days, weakened by a lack of food. She intended to check her traps for something to eat, but just as she walked out, her vision blurred, and she got lost in the snow. Dazed, she reached the lake's edge and nearly slipped into the water. Instantly alert, Michelle scrambled up. A close call indeed. She returned to camp still in shock, chopping wood while sharing her experiences. Her mother had died of cancer when she was very young, so she was used to handling difficulties alone. However, this time, she felt she couldn't endure any longer. 14 days of constipation had pressured her pelvic ligaments. Part of them had already torn during Michelle's childbirth. If the remaining ligaments tore, she could no longer have children. On the other hand, Wanya's weight hadn't decreased much, indicating she had eaten well off camera. In the morning, Wania checked her traps and found a squirrel that had hanged itself, now frozen solid. Although she preferred rabbits, a squirrel was still meat. Returning to camp, Wania happily danced and planned to showcase her craft work. Recently, she had made a slingshot, a knife sheath, and a small bamboo basket. Today, she took out all the rabbit skins she had saved to make a scarf. After some busy work, the scarf was ready. If Wonia caught more, she could make a shawl and a blanket. By day 48, Michelle's condition hadn't improved. Fever and the pain of constipation tormented her, and she feared she might not survive the night. These recordings would capture her last wishes. The next morning, Michelle cried loudly. She didn't want to leave, but staying longer posed a life-threatening risk. With no choice left, she made the call to quit the competition. She had persevered impressively, perhaps a testament to the inherent resilience of women. With Michelle's departure, only 5 of the original 10 contestants remained. These were crucial for Jordan, who had previously lost over 20 pounds from eating meat. He decided to collect some fat from a deer head, knowing that with this fat, winning the $500,000 prize seemed within reach. While the other 4 contestants still worried about food, Jordan was already seeking nutritional balance. He rendered the collected fat into a pot of oil, not only yielding a bunch of crispy snacks, but also preparing for fried fish with deer oil if he caught a big one. Other contestants might despair if they saw this, especially during the upcoming wilderness fashion show, where Jordan's rabbit fur vest showed how many rabbits he'd hunted but unaware that a wolverine was watching him. Contestant Nikki was in a dire state, having become skin and bones. To alleviate the loneliness and cold of the Arctic, she planned to make a teddy bear. Sedge was the perfect stuffing. Back at camp, she sewed a rabbit skin and stuffed it with sedge, finishing it with a bow. The faux teddy bear, named Vapi, was ready. Thinking about Vapi accompanying her to sleep brought a happy smile to Nikki's face. On day 50, since obtaining fat, Jordan was in a great mood. After dawn, he went to inspect the food storage and was stunned. He found bite marks on the meat and all the fat gone, with lots of fur left on the pole and wolf tracks nearby. Jordan concluded another wolverine had visited. It seemed these creatures never learn. The badger just came to deliver meat again shortly after eating last time. To deal with badger number 2, Jordan did this. He set a ring of delicate rabbit traps. So, when the badger climbed up, he hoped it would get caught by the arm, leg, or anywhere effective enough to stop it from climbing further. Then, he placed jars in the most unstable places, so that when the shelf was shaken by the badger, the jars would fall and make noise, connected to the shelter above. Jordan turned the survival challenge into a tower defense game. Who will be the ultimate winner between him and the badger? Wania's wilderness mansion really has something special. She not only built double-insulated walls, but also made a luxurious single bed to withstand the Arctic's severe cold, topped with a pine needle mattress. As long as she can secure food, she still has a chance to win the $500,000. After showing the bedroom, Wonia went out to check the traps. Along the way, she honestly admitted that she might not last much longer without food. Unfortunately, the traps were empty, which was quite discouraging. Just then, a rabbit suddenly darted out of the bushes. Wonia quickly drew her bow and shot, but alas, the rabbit was too fast and escaped. This proved there were still other rabbits near the camp. Wonia then went to check other traps and was surprised to find a rabbit on her snare pole, delighting her immensely. She even had a hunch she would catch a second rabbit, and sure enough, her intuition was spot on as another trap indeed caught one. As usual, she first cried over it, then left behind 2 lines of touch drool. The camera then switched to Jordan. Today was his daughter's birthday. Although he really wanted to be home with his family, the thought of the prize kept him there, continuing to eat meat. To alleviate his loneliness, Jordan carved a deck of cards from birch bark. While other contestants were struggling to survive, he played spider solitaire to pass the time, but lost his composure after losing a game. On day 52, to show gratitude to the rabbits, Wanya dressed up as a rabbit witch and then cooked a full rabbit feast. Enjoying the banquet, while dreaming of her prize-winning days ahead, she promised to take her mother on a trip once home, hoping her dream would come true. Barry, also harboring similar dreams, had already picked out a license plate a few days ago. However, Reality hit him hard as he struggled to find food. Deciding to eat moss, which was abundant in carbohydrates, he had to cook it several times to ensure it was fully cooked and to avoid stomach pain from the moss's acidity. Barry never imagined he'd resort to eating moss, which he'd previously used as toilet paper. Barry finally dared to eat it and discovered it wasn't as bad as he imagined, even tasting like steamed spinach and satisfying his hunger. Nikki wasn't faring much better. Reduced to scavenging squirrel food, a porcini mushroom was her biggest find of the day. After surviving over 50 days in the wilderness without a bath, she decided to use smoke for disinfection. I'll skip the details of that scene for you, just to say she treated me like one of her own. The next morning, Nikki faced her health checkup. Despite trying to hide her weakness, the examination revealed she had lost a quarter of her body weight. The medical staff's concerned expressions hinted at trouble, leading to a decision for her to withdraw from the competition. However, Nikki stubbornly refused to leave. The medical team patiently explained the risk of organ failure and her abnormal blood pressure and heart rate, emphasizing the necessity of hospitalization. Hearing this, Nikki could no longer control her emotions and burst into tears. Honestly, Nikki had already done remarkably well to have lasted this long, but now she had to take responsibility for her health. With Nikki's departure, 4 contestants remained. Who would be the next to leave? Winter was approaching, and the snow was falling heavily. In the Arctic, the temperature plummeted abruptly. Nathan's fire had gone out, and he was the only one without a flint. He resorted to creating fire by friction, but despite his efforts throughout the day, he couldn't get a fire started. The temperature outside dropped to -8 degrees Celsius. Without a fire for warmth at night, it would be unbearably cold. At a critical moment, Nathan remembered a cedar wood board he had obtained a few days earlier. This material was perfect for starting a fire, and after some effort, he finally managed to get a fire going. The camera then shifted to Barry, who had shivered through the previous night. Even sleeping in clothes had not kept him warm. Upon waking, Barry quickly started to boil water for warmth. However, when he went to the lakeside to collect water, he realized something was amiss. There was a loud wind, but no sound of waves. Looking out, he saw that the lake surface was completely frozen over. His berry field, essential for survival, was also buried under the snow. The survival challenge had become even more difficult. Barry initially tried to break the ice with a stone, but the ice remained unscathed. Reluctantly, he resorted to melting snow for water. Early on, he cleverly hunted a moose and later grappled with a wolverine. After the lake froze, he turned to fishing. With these skills, winning the $500,000 prize seemed within reach. So far, this challenge had already convinced 6 people to quit. The harshness of the Arctic winter was evident from Jordan's expression alone. Just the time it took to make a wooden shuttle had frozen his beard. The pain made Jordan grimace. After completing the shuttle, Jordan began weaving a fishing net with the paracord, a tedious and freezing process. Without the fat from the fish, Jordan would not have chosen to stand outside shivering. The existing deer and wolverine meat would sustain him through to the new year. After some busy work, the net was finally ready. Jordan then added some weights and deer meat as bait. The Arctic winter fishing had officially begun. For safety, Jordan had specially made a pair of skis. These helped distribute his weight effectively, preventing him from falling into the lake. After finding a suitable spot, Jordan chiseled 2 large holes in the ice, then used a long stick, almost as long as the fishing net, tied to a long rope, which he maneuvered through the holes. This left the rope beneath the ice surface. Finally, he tied the rope to the fishing net and pulled, sending the net under the ice. After setting everything up, he covered the holes with snow to minimize heat transfer and prevent the ice from refreezing. The camera turns to Wonya. She is shivering in her sleeping bag, enduring the Arctic winter, which is not only cold, but also has short days and long nights. The sun, barely up for 5 hours, quickly sets. With no other option, Wonya has to break ice in the dark to collect water. Unable to bear the freezing temperatures, she reinforces her shelter at 3 a.m. In the morning, she sets traps around her hut, having heard rabbits nearby the previous night. After checking the traps she had set earlier, she finds not only are they empty, but most have been destroyed by the wind and snow. To her frustration, the rabbit burrows have been raided by foxes, making it unrealistic to catch any in the area. Wonya hasn't eaten for days and is at risk of being eliminated from the competition. Driven by hunger and cold, she considers eating rabbit offal, which is generally not consumed by Westerners. Initially intended as bait for fishing, she now consumes it to stave off hunger. To avoid E. coli infection, Wania thoroughly washes the offal before eating. The moment she tastes the fried intestines, she finds them incredibly delicious. The scene shifts to Jordan. He laments his receding hairline, exacerbated by malnutrition causing continuous hair loss. It's time for him to check his fishing nets for a chance to replenish his diet. Jordan's nets do not disappoint, providing him with fish after recent catches of moose and wolf. However, the fish freezes into a solid block as soon as it's removed from the water. This fish alone could provide him with fat for 3 to 4 days. To avoid freezing on the way back to camp, Jordan slices and eats the fish raw on the spot. With such progress, winning the $500,000 seems certain. On day 65 of the survival challenge, Barry lies in his sleeping bag doing sit-ups to keep warm. Though his shelter, barely insulated with a thin waterproof fabric now covered in ice, offers little relief. It's like sleeping in a natural refrigerator, and even a fire does little to help. Facing this immense physical and mental challenge, Barry perseveres for the sake of his wife. His primary focus remains on securing food. He tracks rabbit trails and sets traps in likely paths. Considering traditional spring-loaded traps freeze, Barry opts for a lever-based trap instead. He ties a stone to one end of a rope and attaches the other end to a trigger mechanism looped over a branch, creating an improvised snare. Finally, the camera moves to Nathan. Before the lake froze, he pulled up his gill net, his only reliable means of securing food. To combat the Arctic cold, he heats stones and places them under his bed. He also piles up branches to block the cold wind, securing his warmth. Next, he focuses on food by setting up his modified gill net, adjusted for vertical entry into the water with weights, and stabilized by wooden bars tied to the rope's end. Everything is ready for fishing early the next morning. Waking up, he barely sees the sun and recalls smelling something burning the previous night. Rushing to check, he finds some charcoal still glowing. Far from being scared, he's slightly excited, as this saves him the effort of making a fire from scratch. With the fire kindling preserved, Nathan heads to the lake to set up his net. Compared to Jordan, his net setting process is much simpler. He starts breaking the ice as soon as he finds the right spot, only stopping when a crack appears. Then, he places the prepared fishing net into the water. Having relied on fish meat for over 60 days, he believes the net will soon catch a big fish, but he underestimates how low the Arctic temperatures can go. He hopes that he will still be able to retrieve the net when it's time. On day 69, Wania removes the clothesline outside her hut as the weather only freezes the clothes solid. She routinely checks today's traps. Lately, she's been losing about a pound a day and wouldn't survive without food. The first trap is empty, but the second one holds a small surprise, a squirrel, which tastes much better than rabbit. Unexpectedly, she catches another squirrel, and then yet another, feeling incredibly lucky. Barry, on the other hand, is struggling. His traps yield nothing, and now even drinking water is a problem. After the lake surface freezes over, melting snow for water is too labor-intensive. Discovering an unfrozen spot on the other side of the island, he decides to risk crossing the icy surface to fetch water. For this, Barry even makes a pair of skis. Dehydrated after 24 hours without water, he finally arrives at the lakeside, scoops up a pot of water, and drinks it eagerly. Feeling increasingly aggrieved, he collapses to his knees, overwhelmed by the hardship. Today is Barry's safety checkup. He is utterly confused from hunger. After various checks and questions by the program team, it turns out he has lost over 70 pounds in 70 days, looking extremely gaunt and in poor condition. Continuation could lead to fatal heart failure due to depleted body fat. For his health, the program team decides he must withdraw from the competition. Although Barry initially refuses to leave, he relents after persuasion. After his withdrawal, only 3 contestants remain. The current temperature in the Arctic is minus 21 degrees Celsius, and skin can get frostbitten if exposed for 30 minutes. It's time for Nathan to check his winter fishing setup. The hole he broke open yesterday has frozen over again. Exhausted, he slowly chips away at the ice. After much effort, he reaches the exciting moment to pull up the net, only to find it empty. Starving and disappointed, he becomes irritable. While breaking the ice, He also cuts the net's rope, likely ruining it completely. At this point, Nathan's situation is precarious, having lost 26% of his body weight on day 70, and now without his only tool for catching food. It's uncertain how much longer he can last for the prize money. Meanwhile, Jordan has a small visitor, a ferret boldly trying to steal his rabbit pelts. Since the rules likely prohibit harming the natural predators of the rabbits, Jordan can only watch as the charming little thief makes its escape. The next morning, Jordan plans to prepare venison for breakfast. He admits that despite having an ample protein supply, the lack of fat continues to decrease his weight. He could be eliminated if he fails the medical checkup due to this. Approaching the food storage, Jordan is shocked to find he forgot to move the ladder after last using it. Looking down, he sees Wolverine tracks all over the ground. Jordan laments another major setback as the Wolverine eats all the fat. He had finally caught a big fish to obtain some much-needed fat, but now the Wolverine thrives instead. Frustrated, Jordan throws the big fish to the ground, unsure if he lacks fat or just a challenge. The camera shifts to Wanya, who caught 3 squirrels the other day. However, given her current situation, she's hesitant to eat too much. She starts daydreaming about the taste of butter cookies, exciting herself. Her positive attitude is commendable, especially as survival conditions grow harsher. Wanya feels she's now burning muscle for energy as her body converts muscle to glucose for warmth and sustenance. She knows she can't continue like this. Planning to fish on the lake, she hopes to break through the ice and catch a big fish, potentially winning the $500,000 prize. But Wanya only has a folding saw, making it difficult to penetrate the Arctic ice. Even as she strikes the ice with all her might, it barely scratches the surface. Desperate for food, she keeps trying, but as darkness falls, she fails to create a fishing hole and must rely on traps for sustenance. On day 72, Jordan checks his gill net at the lake again, but finds nothing. He decides to try ice fishing, using a flashlight to attract fish. Despite his efforts at the hole, it's fruitless, and he resigns to return and eat more venison. Meanwhile, Nathan resorts to ice fishing after his net is ruined. His clothes freeze solid soon after breaking the ice. Back at his shelter, he plans to eat the last piece of smoked fish, confident he'll catch a big fish the next day. As he cooks the fish soup, he reminisces about his grandfather and girlfriend, whose encouragement always echoes in his ears when he feels lonely and helpless. Perhaps it's this powerful sentiment that causes his shelter to catch fire unexpectedly. As the fire grew uncontrollable, Nathan could only watch as everything turned to ash. With no other options, Nathan had to make the call to quit the competition. During the call, the bear deterrent in his shelter exploded, providing a fireworks display worth $500,000 just before he left. Since the crew could only fly in at dawn, he had to spend the night next to a large bonfire. With temperatures dropping to -18 degrees Celsius and at least 7 hours until daylight, he endured a long night and finally welcomed the morning, only to find his face had turned black from smoke. It seemed all too harsh for Nathan as a contestant who withdrew. Although he didn't make it to the end to win the $500,000, his perseverance with just a fishing net was impressive. Let's check in on Wanya, who had reached her limits, collecting anything edible she could find: squirrel tails, rabbit forelegs, and a pile of bones. Though this hodgepodge stew wasn't very effective, it was certainly better than just drinking water. After breakfast, Wanya went out to check her traps only to find them empty. However, this news didn't crush her. Thinking of her impoverished family and the $500,000 prize, she declared she would stay unless her body gave out. It's hard not to admire a woman's resilience. Hopefully, she'll find some food in the coming days. On day 73 of the challenge, Jordan reflected on the past during the night. He thought he should have won by now, with all the food he had. But wolves had continuously stolen his fat stores, totaling at least several pounds and about 60,000 calories. His decreasing weight significantly affected his morale. The sudden arrival of the helicopter meant someone was exiting. It was clear who couldn't hold on any longer. Wanya stood in the snow, tears streaming down her face, on her birthday. She couldn't go on and wanted a warm place with food, a perfect birthday gift for herself. Here's hoping she finds more happiness in the days to come. By day 77, Jordan didn't yet know he had won. He was fishing on the lake as usual, and unexpectedly caught the season's biggest dogfish, weighing at least several pounds. It looked like he'd be taking a local delicacy home. Wanya's decision to exit was wise. At this moment, It was essential to take a selfie with the ceremonial sword. Back at camp, Jordan quickly made a fish soup to replenish himself. Even as the medical team arrived, he didn't stop eating, trying to add a little more weight before the weigh-in. The crew conducted a health check quietly and then asked if he could continue. Jordan explained that despite losing a lot of weight, he was healthy and could keep going until the end of the year, confident he could outlast all the contestants. Just then, his wife quietly stepped out from behind. Jordan shares his experiences with his wife, showing her the uneaten moose and the troublesome wolverine. His strength and resilience are evident, making him a deserving winner of the championship and the $500,000 prize. The 6th season of Alone in the Wilderness ends here.